Good morning. I'm Phil McDaniels, and I'll be giving the Sunday morning seminar this morning. I want to thank you all for getting up early and coming out. This is not how it was supposed to work, but things happen, as they say. Took a test this morning and found out that I have COVID. And I feel fine. I don't have hardly any symptoms at all. Big surprise to me. This was the second test I've taken in the last couple of days. The first one came out negative. So I want to apologize to all. And well, thanks to Alan and his expertise and knowledge on all things technical, we can go this other route and get this presentation to you. So you're going to learn two things today. Number one, you're going to learn probably more than you ever wanted to know about the San Diego and San Francisco expositions held in California in the calendar year 1915. And number two, you're going to find out real quickly that I am not a public speaker. And with your graces and goodwill, I'll get through this one way or the other. It probably won't be pretty, and there's going to be some awkward silences while I search for the right word, but we'll give it the best shot that we can to get it done. I looked up the word World's Fair in the dictionary, and it said this of it: a World's Fair is a exhibition of a wide variety of industrial, scientific, and cultural items on display at a specific site for a period of time. World's Fairs include exhibits from a number of countries and often have entertainment zones in which visitors can enjoy rides, attractions, and food. Since the 19th century, there has been more than 100 World's Fairs in 20 different countries. Generally speaking, in the United States, they're called expositions. In Europe and Asia, they're called World's Fairs. In Great Britain, exhibition. The first one was held in 1851 in London, and the first one in the United States was held in 1876 in Philadelphia. And it celebrated the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. As a kid growing up in California, we would regularly go to Balboa Park. It was a tradition for my family to load my brother and myself up in the back of the '53 Chevrolet and go to Balboa Park and view the Christmas lights that were strung along the Cabrillo Bridge that you see on the left of this postcard. This was built as a west entrance to Balboa Park. It's still in existence, still in use. Highway 163 goes underneath this now and connects downtown San Diego with the northern suburbs. Well, we'd go there during Christmas and look at the Christmas lights. They had displays set up by the Spreckles organ, the nativity scenes, and it was a fun yearly tradition that we made. Innovations made during the first 15 years of the 20th century changed the world and really the way we live in it. The telephone, the automobile, radio, air flight, electrical inventions like the refrigerator, the vacuums. Just much of what we take for granted today were just being put into use for a rapidly expanding middle class. The series of expos that they had showcased these developments. And of course, this was done all before mass media advertising came along. So a way for the word to get out was through these expositions that were held. This postcard really could be considered the first picture postcard in the United States. It was printed on the back of a postal card. which had the engraving of a stamp on it. And this was a series of, I believe, 10 that were produced for the 1893 Columbian Exposition. This was to celebrate the landing of Columbus. A phenomenally successful exposition in Chicago, Illinois. The World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904 was originally scheduled to coincide with the 100th anniversary of the 1803 Louisiana Purchase. The fair drew almost 20 million people over a 7-month run. The 1904 Olympics were held in conjunction with the fair, but really were much overshadowed by the fair itself. This fair is probably best known for the new food that was either invented or at least popularized, like the ice cream cone, hamburgers, hot dogs, cotton candy, peanut butter, and iced tea. Jamestown Exposition of 1907 commemorated the founding of the Jamestown colony in Virginia, which was the first permanent English settlement in the United States. This fair was a real financial failure, lost several $1 million. Attendance was 3 million, really a fraction of the numbers that was promised by the promoters. The entertainment zone was called the Warpath, and much of the fair was unfinished on opening days. It got to the point where visitors regularly called it the Jamestown Imposition. In 1908, they had a successful fair in Seattle, Washington, the Alaska Yukon Expo. It was originally planned for 1907 to mark the 10th anniversary of the Klondike Gold Rush. It was pushed back to 1909 to avoid that conflict. Fairgrounds became the campus of the University of Washington. And about almost 4 million people attended this fair. This was another fairly successful World's Fair. So San Francisco began their first plans to stage a World's Fair as early as 1904. And they were no stranger to mass celebrations for the populace. In 1909, they scheduled what they called the Portola Festival. It attracted close to 1 million people over a 5-day event. And these were done to show the world and the citizens that was looking for a way to celebrate the rebirth of the city, and that was ready to be back in business on hold large events and attract tourists. It was named for Don Gaspar de Portola, who discovered San Francisco Bay. And this is a postcard from that exposition that shows the mass crowds. It was very successful. There's a number of good postcards from this one. They celebrated another festival in 1913 as kind of a prelude to the World's Fair in 1915. In 1910, they had an Admission Day festival. This is a beautiful poster card from that exposition. By the turn of the 19th century, San Francisco was a thriving city filled with great neighborhoods, parks. It had a bustling economy. Reuben Hale kind of got the ball rolling, and his powerful merchant association proposed that San Francisco should be the next city to hold a international exposition. And we're going to call it the PPIE, which is a Panama International Exposition. Main purpose was to celebrate the completion of the Panama Canal that was completed in 1906. But secondary was it was seen as the opportunity to showcase its recovery from the 1906 earthquake. that knocked down a good majority of buildings. I think I've read where it knocked down 28,000 buildings in the city. It's amazing that earthquake did so much damage. I think the resulting fire afterwards did even more damage from it. And then there was other parts of the city that were not affected almost in the least. I know the mint that produced coins made production runs in 1906, and it was scarcely damaged at all. By 1909, San Francisco had competition from New Orleans and San Diego for rights to hold the next World's Fair. And each one claimed that they were the logical choice for representation. This is a postcard of a very rare New Orleans booster postcard. This is not from my collection. And I should note that almost everything that I have shown here is from my own collection. If it isn't, I'll make a point of that. Or if it's not a postcard, I'll go ahead and make a notation of that. I've never seen in my years of collecting World's Fair postcards from New Orleans, and I just thought this was of interest. And they had a point. It was logistically probably a better point than San Francisco. It was on the West Coast, and compared to now was not as developed and was harder to get to. But New Orleans, San Diego, and San Francisco all had valid claims as being what they called the logical point for it, in closeness to the Panama Canal. And this is another image, not from my collection. It's just a monthly showing the cover of it, and again, a very scarce item. This is a booster postcard, and San Francisco was just light years ahead of San Diego and Los Angeles, strategically getting ready for the World's Fair in 1915. Things really started cooking in about 1910. And from mid-1910 through 1911, San Francisco interests made a number of booster postcards that both advertised and encouraged citizens to get on their side to boost the World's Fair. Both city government, industries and businesses, and also the populace of San Francisco were very well organized. And there's really no contest when you came right down to it. I thought this was an interesting card. There's a series of about, I think, at least 6 of these cards similar to this one. In the second or third paragraph, it says that San Francisco, rather than at New Orleans, is a logical place because New Orleans is an inland city. Well, last time I checked, I don't think that's true, but an interesting card. Another booster card, kind of mimicking a telegraph that was printed, and then at the bottom there it said, "Read this notice and show it to your congressman." These were the two movers and shakers. Charles Moore was the president, very capable person from business, and on the right is James Rolfe, who was the mayor. His whole term of the 4 years from 1912 to 1916 was basically getting ready and getting in preparation to hold the event. Nickname of Sunny Jim, and he led the march on opening day down to the gates of it, where he broke off into run. I think I mentioned that in a newsletter article recently, but both very capable. This is from a large series by E.H. Mitchell of booster postcards that are done both in color and in a sepia tone like this. Also in this series is another one showing the president, which is not in my collection. This is another grouping of booster postcards. I think they're just gorgeous pictures of this young lady. Very symbolic, wearing the Panama hat emblazoned with San Francisco 1915 and the state flower of the golden poppies. There's at least 5 different views of this young lady. I've tried to look up and see if I could get any information on her, if she was queen of the festival or had some kind of connection. I haven't found out anything at all on her, so I just have to assume that she was just a model. Another group of booster postcards. There's 2 in this series. Ground was broken in October of 1911 for the fair, and this is just a great allegorical postcard showing President Taft, who made the decision in Washington, D.C. that the fair was to be held in San Francisco, being greeted by Uncle Sam and the axe with the splice on the Panama Canal. And the second one in that series showing Uncle Sam getting off the boat with the world in his hand, being greeted by an allegorical figure of San Francisco. 2 super booster cards. This is a series of 12 poster type postcard booster cards. Beautiful series by Exposition Publishing. I think this is my favorites out of the series with the allegorical painting. And another one from that series. Beautiful cards, quite scarce. Took me a while to accumulate the whole set, but it's a beautiful set when it's all put together. On the back of one of these Exposition Publishing cards is printed out of that day, San Francisco, September the 3rd, 1915. It's a financial success as well as an artistic success. Its last cent of debt was paid today. Send this to your absent friends today. There's a number of different overprints on these cards, some advertising and others like this with information on them. In the summer of 1915, 21-year-old Estelle Ford, the only son of Henry, and 6 of his friends took the road to visit the World's Fair Exposition in San Francisco. Ford Motor Company had one of the most popular exhibits at the fair, which was a working Model T assembly line that produced, I believe, 18 Model Ts a day. Interesting that there's no postcards of that. The plan of the Lincoln Highway was Carl Fisher, who was the owner of the Indianapolis 500 Speedway, had cited that the Panama Exposition in September 1912, when he told his automobile industry associates about his plan for a coast-to-coast rock highway from New York City to San Francisco. With the $10 million he hoped to raise from the industry, he planned to have the new road, which was soon to be named the Lincoln Highway, ready for travel. So a core of 25,000 automobiles could be taken over this road to the opening in May or June of 1915. Well, that plan didn't work out. And one of the main reasons for that was that Henry Ford didn't get on board. He didn't think the highway should be paid by private funds. He felt that the government should do it. So by the time the World's Fair opened in 1915, the highway was no way completed. More so in the east, of course, but when they got out into the western states, it dissolved into just a series of what they called farm roads from town to town. This is a view of the Apache Trail Highway through Arizona. Before 1926, the U.S. highway system really was virtually non-existent. And the roads were named Apache Trail, the National Highway, Lincoln Highway. In 26, there was legislation that was approved for a numbering system. But as a means to get to the fair, very few took an automobile from out of state. The rails were the way to get there, and by far the most popular way to get there. The commission, World's Fair Commission in San Francisco, got together and made deals with the railroads to have them offer fares. And this is not in my collection, but is a poster from the Santa Fe Railway advertising round trip fares to both fairs. And they give an example on this as from Chicago, only cost $62.50. Then you can add on, of course, things like a sleeper berth and meals en route with another couple of bucks. A side trip to the Grand Canyon, $7.50. This is the way most people got to the fair. And this sounds, in today's money, really cheap. But when you figure out that $1 then equals $30 today, this cost a lot of money, and it was not cheap to take the train out there. And the third alternative to get to the fair was by ship through the Panama Canal. It was not used by many people. They estimate that about 450 people, East Coast visitors, arrived by rail. Some took the ship by the newly opened Panama Canal. And approximately 15,000 visitors came by automobile. You know, those are just kind of wild guesses. And I've got to think that the 15,000 visitors by automobile were all from the area, or at least the state of California. California's first paved highway connected the fair to the other World's Fair in San Diego in 1915, and that was the first paved highway. This is a postcard showing F.E. Wilvert. He says he's walking on stilts from Harrisburg, PA to the exposition at a max height of 10 feet 8 inches. He supposedly said, "I make good time and don't mind the hot weather, although I'm practically stranded when the wind blows. My stilts and paraphernalia weigh 22 pounds and almost out of the question to buck the wind." The Panama Pacific Exposition Commission, which oversaw funds, offered $5,000 to the party who travels cross country in the most unique manner. Mr. Wilvert covered 3,000 miles and averaged 22 miles a day along the Lincoln Highway. Now, I have tried to read follow-up stories on if that $5,000 prize was actually given away and to who won it. And other than this little bit, I can find nothing that talks about that $5,000 prize. So I have no idea if it was really the real deal or who actually won it, because there's a number of people that would qualify, as we'll see here in just a moment. This is one postcard of several that I have in my collection of the Overland Westerners. And they were a group that was led by George Beck. He's a 30-year-old part-time logger in Washington who made a reputation for himself by making the longest horseback ride on record. To his end, he planned with 3 of his companions in 1911 to ride on horseback to every capital in the 48 states and arrive at the exposition. He reached an agreement with the Westerner, which was a Seattle magazine, by which the riders would sell subscriptions, and the magazine would then cover their travels. George went to Seattle, ordered postcards and calendars to advertise and sell on their journey, and showed their zigzag route across the country. This is a double fold postcard. This is the back end of it. A story about a $20,000 prize offered by the Northwestern Stockmen's Association circled. Although it was denied by Beck, the story stated that if the party reached San Francisco with Pinto, they were to receive $1 for each mile. They reached Sacramento, the last state capital, in May of 1915. Between them, they'd spent $9,000, had endured 1,127 days of riding, and used up 17 horses, which more than several died on the road. They arrived in June 1st to absolutely no crowds and no riches. They'd achieved a little bit of fame through some newspaper columns, but he writes that the midway at the exposition was flopping, dying the breeze from San Francisco Bay, Beck wrote. The pot of gold we had been pursuing had moved way out into the Pacific Ocean. He reportedly said they didn't have any trouble till they reached the South, and there everybody was as poor as they were, and financially pretty much were ruined. But it's an amazing story, and I'll be doing an article in the newsletter on them in the near future. Harry and Estelle Mason. She was a mail carrier in Nome, Alaska. This card is one that they undoubtedly sold on their excursion. They had the lofty dreams in 1908 to start this trip, which was a year before any plans for the exposition even started. So although it says bound for the Panama Pacific Exposition, that's not true. They didn't even know it was going to be there for a $12,500 purse. Again, no telling where the $12,500 purse came from. This is really misleading. The accounts that I've read on it, Estelle, I'm not sure which she was, on the left or the middle, said she was accompanied by a companion. Harry's only claim to fame was he wrote a poem put on the back of some of these cards. It makes them look like that he was an active participant. Not so at all. Another group of walkers. They're off on a walking exposition, a distance of 10,000 miles. They want to collect that $5,000 prize, and this is a kindly buy a card to help us along the way and wish us good luck. And good luck. You'll notice both of these fellows are missing a hand, and again, I don't know anything other than what this information on this card tells us. Patrick Harmon one-upped them. He decided to get there by walking backwards from now it says here San Francisco to New York, so I'm not sure which way he was headed, either to or from, or what his plans for riches were, other than probably the sale of these cards. And then some that are even more obscure than that. Bertha Kimball and May Lilly walking from Indianapolis to Frisco. Don't know anything other than the limited information on this one. The only thing on here is, if you ever go to San Francisco, don't call it Frisco, or even worse than that, San Diego, don't call it Dago. You'll probably get strung up. The Inside Inn was a huge hotel that was on the grounds of the exposition itself. Makes perfect sense to me. If you got worn out during the middle of the day, you didn't have to get off the fairgrounds themselves and take a taxi to your hotel, which were plentiful in San Francisco. They had the infrastructure set to house the World's Fair. These buildings are all made to be temporary. They look substantial. They look solid. They weren't. Almost everything that you'll see was bulldozed at the end of this fair, which just blows my mind, really, with a few exceptions. And I'll go into that in more detail in just a little bit. And this is a brochure. that tells just a little bit about it, the benefits to it. Gives prices, single from $2, single with bath from $3 to $5. And then gives you information over on the right side about what it's going to cost you to take a bus or a streetcar or a taxi. And I thought the taxi rates were pretty high. A special charge will be made of about $2 for a trip from the terminals to the inside end for 2, 3, or 4 people in a party with hand baggage. $1 being worth about $7 today. So again, that's a 14 in today's money. That's about a $14 fare. This is a night view of the Tower of Jewels and the light display, the tallest building at the fairground. And again, temporary. It was 435 feet high, as tall as a 40-story building. And it was covered with over 100,000 glass jewels, or what they called nova gems, that reflected the sunlight, as well as the fair's nighttime light displays. Light shows were described as aerial fireworks. The scintillator, which is the kind of the fuzzy lights over on the left-hand side, so a series of 48 searchlights placed on the seawall near the yacht harbor. And 3 times a week, the Marines would manipulate the different colored lights across the sky, and they would reflect them off the fog banks or the low clouds that were typical in San Francisco. If it was a clear day, they'd get the steam locomotives that were part of the fairgrounds and get them to billow up clouds of steam out there. Just a very electrical and evidently a beautiful sight. This is 12-year-old Virginia Stevens, and she won a contest sponsored by the San Francisco newspaper to nickname the fair. Her winning submission, which was one of about 1,300 entries, was the Jewel City, a reference to the skyscraping jewel-encrusted tower that we just saw. Not many people knew she was African American, as reported. It was the newspapers regretted to say when it was discovered that she had colored blood, there was a sudden silence on the part of the press, and the only recognition even given to her was some season tickets to the grounds. She might have remained anonymous, but for the efforts of Black Women's Club members. At Alameda Day on June 10th, they arranged for her to be crowned queen and to ride with 50 other African-American children on a parade float, described by the Oakland Sunshine as a credit to her race. She went on to attend the University of California Law School and was admitted to the bar and had a long career in legislative council in Sacramento. Opening day. A crowd on opening day, 255,000 people. If you didn't like crowds, you didn't want to be at this fair. The crowds were just enormous. Elizabeth Weiss was one of the attractions at the fair. There's a number of these postcards. I know of at least 6 different ones showing her and the size of her, supposedly the smallest perfectly formed woman on earth. Great cards. And this is a reverse of one of them. Every card that I have ever seen showing her has been dated and information is put on the back. What's interesting about this is dated December the 5th of 1915. The fair closed on December the 4th of 1915. So I'm not sure how that worked, but most of them are autographed by her. And I assume that they were written by her, and perhaps for some kind of monetary exchange, you were given one of these postcards. Most of them tell her age, her height, and her weight. But like I say, every one I have seen were signed by her. This is a real photo of Art Smith, nicknamed the Bird Boy from the exposition. On March 14th of 1915, Lincoln Beechey, who was the most daring airplane pilot of the day, and who was originally the pilot for the exposition to give the flights, exhibition flights, crashed into the bay after the wings of his monoplane folded in one of his dives. It went about 2,000 feet straight down and in front of a stunned crowd. What's amazing, he evidently was not killed on impact, but instead, unfortunately, drowned when he couldn't extradite himself from the airplane. So Art Smith took over very capably. He was a 25-year-old aviator and had made daily flights and sky acrobats, including just some amazing dips and loops at night during the run of the fair. A picture of him with ex-President Roosevelt at the controls, and this shows his course. He would put flares on the wingtips of this biplane, and this biplane was just basically wooden fabric, and just make these corkscrews and just amazing loops. It's amazing those planes held together. And this shows a trail of those flares during his flight. After the fair, he became a pilot for the U.S. Airmail Service, and specializing in night flying and testing new equipment. And like so many of those early aviators, he died in 1926 in a plane crash in Ohio during bad weather. One of my favorite postcards from this exposition. This is an embroidered postcard. On the back of it, it is not posted. It's written to my teddy boy. And I can't, I'm being blocked here with, and probably you can see it better up in the corner. This card was made and embroidered in the Varied Industries building at the exposition. Keep it as a souvenir of the World's Fair of 1915. Lovingly, Mama. Just great postcard with kind of a shame that left that family, but I'm happy to have it. The Liberty Bell made the San Francisco Exposition. It was previously shown at the Columbian, the Buffalo, and the St. Louis World's Fair. But because of ever increasing cracks in it, or crack in it, it was decided that the appearance at the San Francisco Fair would be its last trip from Philadelphia. Came on rail on the way out. Over 120,000 people viewed it on its stopover in Dallas alone. And then on its return trip, it went down the coast and stopped in both Los Angeles and San Diego. A postcard showing a long-tail fowl from the poultry building. Livestock and animal exhibits were a big mention, more like a state fair than anything else. Truly, this fair had just about anything for everybody, and it's just kind of an uncommon card for it. Fair brought performing arts to the millions of people that went to the fair. Every day was packed with music, song, and dance, and live music was heard throughout the fairgrounds. Everything from symphonies to marches. Many of the visitors had their first taste of foreign culture, observing the dances from countries like Norway, Ireland, Japan, China, Mexico. John Philip Sousa performed, and big parades were held at least daily, most oftentimes, many times a day. Visitors walked in past the domed horticulture palace and its elaborately landscaped gardens, passing under the Tower of Jewels that we talked about. they were all built in a grid surrounding a central court. There were 8 of these primary palaces. They were devoted to food products, agriculture, transportation, mines, education, social economy, and liberal arts. At the far western edge of the grouping, the Palace of Fine Arts, and the only surviving building today, curved around a giant lagoon. To the east of all this was the Palace of Machinery and the Joy Zone. These were huge palaces. In fact, I've heard a report that before he died, Beachy flew an airplane inside one of these buildings. Now, I don't know if it was a circulus route or if it was just a up and down straight, display, but they were just huge. And again, just demolished at the end of the fair. Showing the crowds between the buildings, and this is looking between the palaces. Again, they had wood or steel framing, but were covered with wire and plaster for speed of construction and ease of removal at the fair. Laura Ingalls Wilder was there and wrote a detailed, let's see, here's my line, letter to her husband, saying the coloring is so soft and wonderful, blues and reds, greens and yellows and browns, all blended into one perfect whole. It's a fairyland. The Palace of Food Products was nicknamed the Palace of Nibbling Arts because of the free samples handed out. A postcard showing the yacht harbor at the marina. A lot of activity and naval displays there. This is from a display of the model post office, which was located in the Palace of Mines and Mineralogy. It allowed visitors to view the journey of the mail, including multiple conveyor belts and sorters. Postcards mailed at these locations was available at general delivery at the exposition within 3 minutes. And this just makes this postcard. You can't get better than this. So this postcard was used at the model post office, went through the tubes that we saw on the front of it, postmarked from the fair August the 10th. It's got the model post office cancel, and it's canceled over a commemorative stamp from the Panama Pacific Exposition. It's funny, up there in the top, the dealer wrote good stamp on there. Dear Mama, we are taking in the model post office today, and they give us these cards so we can see how everything works. So I'm sending mine to you. Having a good time. Harrison. It's addressed to his mom in Lost Springs, Kansas. Just doesn't get any better than that. Fair is really known for their postcards showing the displays in all of these palace buildings. Nothing like it in any other World's Fair exposition anywhere. Literally, there must be 100 different views of the displays, and they're just really interesting. This is why I just selected a couple to show. That showed the vendors' booths and displays. This is from the National Pure Water Company. Lipton tea and their display. I'm sure they were handing out Lipton tea right and left, representing Bromo Seltzer from a display there. And writing daily at the Underwood exhibit, the Underwood Typewriter Company debuted an enormous 14-ton typewriter in the Liberal Arts building. It was 21 feet wide and 18 feet high. And headlines, daily headlines, were typed out on a 9 by 12 foot piece of paper. It was operated by a regular size typewriter, which would again print out on this huge typewriter. The breaking news on May 7th was an announcement that the Lusitania had been sunk by German submarines. This is from the General Electric Company's exhibit. I'm trying to find out how many houses actually had electricity in 1915. And I've read estimates anywhere from 10 to 30% of residential homes had electricity. I'm sure it was far larger in cities, bigger cities and towns than it was in rural areas. So it's kind of hard to gauge on what. But electrical dinner was given in honor of Thomas Edison and Mr. and Mrs. Henry Ford on October the 21st of 1915. Yeah, that said, from what I understand, inside the full-size house, which was a mission-side bungalow, they promoted their electrical appliances, including an electric fireplace, an intercom, a player piano, fans, a toaster, a coffee maker, and sewing machine. Just all new items made to showcase and uses of electricity for a larger and larger middle class in the United States. Kansas was represented. They both had an agricultural exhibit, which is shown on this postcard, and also a state building. After young Ansel Adams and his father visited the fair, his father declared that Ansel would take the rest of the school year off and instead attend the fair every day, knowing that his education that year couldn't be rivaled by what he would learn there. The railroads were big there and had displays. This shows a locomotive from the Southern Pacific Railroad. This is the Kansas State building. Individual state houses were constructed. I believe there was 25 different buildings that were constructed similar to this. And I've read accounts that between 43 and 48 different states were represented there. The pavilions hosted the exhibits of their products as well as education on the states. And they were used to hold receptions, banquets, and events. 34 nations were represented, and the nations also included Hawaii, which was not a distinct part of the United States. And amongst the fair's highlights was Hawaiian ukulele music. It became the fair's and the nation's biggest musical craze. They had a Hawaiian quintet played for as many as 34,000 people a day in front of this building. In the first decades of the 20th century, Audrey Munson was the most sought after artist model in the country, supposedly the most perfectly formed woman in the world. More than 3/4 of the female sculptures and figures in the fairground bore her likeness, earning her the name the Exposition Girl. I did an article in the newsletter some time ago about her. I hope you saw it. Just a tremendous story. She lived to 104 years old, spent the last 60 years of her life in a mental institution. She also has the supposedly honor of being the first person to be nude in a film production during this time span. A sad life, and unfortunate. This is not in my collection, but I thought it was of interest. It's a photograph showing the scale of the sculptures that were made. This was a pre-opening picture made of people viewing these sculptures. And this was ultimately put on the roof of one of the buildings, but it gives you a scale and a magnificence of these sculptures that were ultimately, most of them destroyed. There's over 1,500 sculptures. Art really played a big role. They were on tops of buildings and fountains, in shrubbery. It's just incredible that not more of them were saved. The Palace of Fine Arts was the primary location of exhibited artwork, and it had thousands of paintings on display from artists all over the world. Bear with me on this. I think it's worthwhile. Helen L's father died on October the 12th, 1911, a few days before her 7th birthday. Her mother sold the farm on July 12th, 1914, and took the children to live with relatives in an elegant mansion at 123 Edgewood Avenue. A short, steep brick street on the east side of what is now U.S. UCSF Medical Center. The household consisted of Helen, her great aunt, her grandmother, her mother, her aunt, her older sister, her younger sister, and 7 females, or 7 generations, supported financially by the wealthy great aunt. Quite a change on the nuclear family. In the summer of 1915, when Helen was 10 years old, she went to the Panama Pacific Exposition. We had season tickets, of course, because that's the way my aunts always behaved. But to get there, we'd go off Edgewood Avenue, and that was a chore in itself. Then you take number 6 streetcar and then change the Grove to the number 22, and then you got off the top of Fillmore Street, took the cable car down the steepest tracks I'd ever seen in my life. Well, of course, the people would be standing straight, and they started over the hill, and then everybody was smashed to the bottom of the streetcar, of course, going down with all on top of each other. And with my family, who couldn't bear anyone to touch them and thought everybody was a rapist, Aunt Allie, Helen's great aunt, would be screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop that, sir, and mercy on us." And little Annie, Helen's aunt, would be saying, "Oh, Allie, please don't talk like that." And Helen, "Where are you?" And I'd be smashed to smithereens by the time we got down. I think it was 3 hills, but it may have been 2. And then we straightened out again, and everybody straightened themselves up and started walking back into the car, trying to pretend they'd never been off balance and lost their dignity. But that's how we got to the fair. And then when you came home, it was the other way, going up that hill. Of course, everybody was still in the same place, down at the bottom, but it was a different kind of feeling going up. Oh man, those days. And this is some of the artwork from the Palace of the Arts, a series of postcards showing the famous artwork. The amusement area was called the Zone after the Canal Zone at 65 acres and a cost of $3.5 million. Again, imagine that in today's money. The Zone was the largest exposition amusement park ever built, but it was considered by many to be a failure in both attendance and financial respect. One of the attractions there were Native Americans and indigenous people from several American territories lived on the Zone in ethnic villages, and this was common with World's Fairs of this time. In cultural demonstration, Maori, Samoan, Somali people dance and perform rituals. Laura Ingalls wrote, "We went to the Zone and went to the Samoan village. There were several girls and men dressed or rather undressed in their native costumes. They wore necklaces and strings of beads and rings. The Aeroscope was San Francisco's answer to the Eiffel Tower, and the Ferris wheel was designed by Joseph Strauss, who later designed the Golden Gate Bridge. It was as high as a 22-story building. The car held 118 passengers." A picture of the Aeroscope at night. The 49er camp was one of the attractions, offered a gambling experience in which chips could be bought for money, but cashed only for coupons or other attractions there at that attraction. The 101 Ranch was there. My only complaint about this card is somebody spilled some coffee on the upper right-hand corner, but a rare postcard. I've only seen this one. I'm fortunate to have it. This is just wonderful because they show here in the right-hand corner of it the people from the show out there on display, and just wow, what a treat that'd be to have been there to see that. The diving girls were at the exposition. Admission to most of these shows range anywhere from 10 cents to 50 cents. 10 cents being worth $3 today. So even a dime was fairly big money back then. And these are the girls themselves displaying a wide range of bathing costumes from that period of time. I just can't imagine how heavy those wool bathing suits must have been. Concessions came and went as unpopular, unprofitable attractions gave way to new ones. They continually dropped prices, but many fair visitors were careful with their funds due to national and economic conditions, chose not to spend their money on these attractions. This is a concession, Old Faithful. It ejected a big column of boiling water and steam every 20 minutes, mimicking Old Faithful. Nearly 10,000 gallons of water per minute roared over the 85-foot high copy of Yellowstone Falls. And this is a Panama Canal. Again, notice the crowds, just amazing. And then our family bought the tickets, and this is from Helen Els. And then our family bought the tickets, and then we went in, and the Panama Canal was really a very interesting thing. They had it all in a tiny little miniatures, and they showed exactly how the things worked, and the water running in from the Atlantic to the Pacific, I should say, into the locks. And then the little boats that went through, and the little things that they called the mules or the donkeys. So I was terribly impressed with this, and was ever such a wonderful thing. Helen Els. Helen wrote, well, having such very thrifty and stingy relatives, we spent most of our time in the food products building, and that was fine with us because Harriet and I loved to get all these dear little samples that we played grocery store with when we got home. And many of them had good things to eat inside, and that's the reason my family spent their time to buy any lunch. The one thing that my great aunt did buy, and she let us each have one too, was scones, and they were really, she called them scans, and they were really scones, but she, you see, came from a Scottish family in Bermuda, and they were the only ones that tasted anything like the ones that her mother's servants made. And I think it was a Scottish family who were making them. Well, so that was how we got our luncheon. And then we walked and walked and walked, and my family were the greatest people, looking at all the lovely things. And I must say that these are the days of handicrafts, that everything looked at was beautiful. They came from every country, and they all had or little stores or else a whole building. And what is a whole building? They'd call it. Well, anyway, there we would walk. And of course, every other little child would be taken to what was called the zone, which was like the boardwalk in Santa Cruz with all those mad, insane, crazy things showing that my family thought were absolutely beyond the pale and they wouldn't have anything to do with. But to their great sorrow, there were two things of value in education in the zone, and especially the one that was called the Dayton Flood, because it was Dayton, Ohio, that was where my father was born. So my mother insisted we go to see that. But you see, what they felt was the idea of the people who ran that exposition, not to put those two educational things right on the outside of the zone. So you didn't have to take your children through seeing Stella, who was kind of a half-naked lady, and all those grotesque people, the fat lady, the thin man standing out in front, trying to get you lured into those dreadful, hateful, terrible, misleading things for children. They almost blinded us. They could have if they would have put the horses' blinders on us to go through to get to the Dayton Flood. Then they bought the tickets, and we were trying to see out the sides of our eyes and trying to pretend that we aren't looking because they made us promise not to. And this is a picture of the Concession of Stella. Big crowd, 10 cents a look. I debated whether putting a picture of Stella, which was a Rubenesque lady, laying in the nude. I've seen several different pictures that was supposed to depict it. I decided not to. It's nothing that you couldn't have seen at the Palace of Arts or any of the artistic displays on the fairgrounds. And a postcard showing the outside of the building of the Dayton Flood. We went in, and the Dayton Flood was a great big area with a little make-believe main street of houses. And all of a sudden, after the man told you about the tragedy of this awful flood that came to Dayton, Ohio, I can't remember what year, well, it was 1913. A spurt of water came out of a hole and went down the middle of the little street. And then the man told you about how many people had killed and drowned, and all this tragedy was before you. And you sat there with your mouth open. Helen Els. The submarines was reportedly a model for the submarine ride years and years later at Disneyland. Toyland was created by Fred Thompson, who was the founder of Coney Island's Luna Park, supposedly a playground for grown-ups, and was the largest at 14 acres in the zone. On December the 4th, the ship's cannons fired at sunset, officially closing the palaces and touching off a final frenzy of events. A parade of floats circled the palaces between 8:30 and 10, after which the greatest display of fireworks ever seen in the West began. As the scintillators splayed colored beams across the skies. I quote, "When the exposition's buildings are torn down, then we will have destroyed one of the greatest architectural units which has ever been created in the history of the world." Despite pleas and a resolution pleading for the preservation of the fair, demolition began almost immediately. The Ohio State building was bought for $1,000 at auction. It was floated off on barges to be used as a clubhouse for a country club south, and lasted until 1956 when it was demolished and burned. Los Angeles, of course, was the town in the middle between San Francisco and San Diego. Originally, I thought they were felt like they were left off, but it was beneficial to Los Angeles to have those fairs as a halfway point between the two of them. In fact, they helped fund the San Diego Fair. And this is a postcard assuring people that the real meat in California was in LA. The San Diego Fair was held during the same time. Actually, it opened up in January of 1915, where the San Francisco Fair opened up in April. It was the Panama California Exposition was formed in September of 1909, and its board of directors was led by Ulysses S. Grant's son, Jr., and Vice President John D. Spreckles, who was the son of Spreckles, who was a sugar magnate, C&H Sugar in Hawaii. The proposed site for the fair in San Diego was at Balboa Park. Balboa Park was 1,400 acres just north, a little bit east of downtown. This was a bold move by San Diego to stage a fair. Their population was about 30,000 compared to over 500,000 people in San Francisco. During the early stages and decisions to where to hold the fair, San Francisco and New Orleans battled it out. San Francisco had kind of made a deal that San Diego could hold a similar event, but not international in scope, just showcasing the region. So the San Diego Fair did not have any of the international displays or exhibits, and actually only about 8 state buildings. It was an entirely different type of fair. A postcard saying January 1st to December 31st of 1915. In little tiny print underneath Panama, California, you can see international. So they kind of got away with that one. And another booster card showing the city of San Diego looking east from Point Loma down across Fort Rosecrans, which today is a large cemetery out into San Diego Harbor towards the city and the mountains in the background. Groundbreaking parade was held in 1911. They love to throw a parade in California. One of the reasons that San Diego's population was kept down for so many years and San Francisco and Los Angeles boomed was that access to San Diego County was almost non-existent from the east. This is a view showing Carrizo Gorge in eastern San Diego County on the tracks of the San Diego and Arizona Railway. The ground was so unstable there that landslides and rock slides were just a constant problem. There was never any reliable rail service, which was the only way into California during the turn of the century. Between earthquakes, landslides, floods, and fires, it was never a reliable system, and never has been. Today, to get to San Diego from train, you go from Los Angeles down the coast by the coaster. There is no real rail service. And of course, highways. This shows the Myers Canyon up the Mountain Springs grade from the desert on up to Acumba at the top of the hill. I can remember as a kid in the 1950s taking this road from our trips to a friend's house in El Centro. And what an awful, dangerous road US Highway 80 was, going up this mountain. If you got stuck behind a truck, you were just doomed because of the twisty two-lane nature of it, just a dangerous highway. And of course, they had the plank road across the desert, the sand dunes between El Centro and Yuma, constantly shifting. The only way to get across it, they built this plank road. As a kid, again, I can remember seeing sections of this when we'd make trips across the area as a kid that were still left off in the distance from US 80. I think it's all gone now. This actually shows one of the passing lanes that they put. I'm not sure what distance it was, but it was difficult, and getting across that desert was difficult just because of the heat. This is from the 1909 Alaska Yukon exhibition, just kind of San Diego rubbing it in with a display on the high and cold temperatures in the city during that time. Wonderland. San Diego had a Wonderland. This was in Ocean Beach, which is just over Point Loma. I've tried to find out more information. I want to dig in some more on this, but just a big amusement zone right on the beach there. And at Wonderland, they had animals exhibited. This shows the lions. I'm not sure how many different animals. It was not a lot, but these were taken to the fair in Balboa Park and used for exhibit there. When the fair ended, they were left there, and these animals formed the world famous San Diego Zoo that we have today in Balboa Park. This is the approach to the formal guards in the citrus orchard at the Isthmus, which was the amusement section. This was a whole different type of fair, and you're going to see a stark difference in number of people viewed on these postcards. Real photo postcard showing the model orchard, San Diego Fair. Overview of the plantings. There are over 2 million plants of 1,200 different varieties. The fair was ringed by two north-south canyons, the Cabrillo Canyon, which the bridge went over, and Florida Canyon. And that separated the park into 3 different mesas. This is the chief guide to the San Diego Fair. And signed or written on the back of this card is the name Don Guido Patrico. I'm thinking Don Guido Patrico probably wasn't this guy's real name. It's probably Bob Johnson, but he had just about the best gig in town for the 2 years that the fair was in existence. The electric quits, hard for me to say. It was a wicker fleet of little mobiles. They had a fleet of 200 that skirted the passengers or the fairgoers around the fair. Pigeons were a big thing at this fair, and if you see one of these postcards, and they were taken and I'm sure sold to the tourists as a souvenir, they're all surrounded by pigeons, which is not my thing, but to each his own. Don Guido feeding the pigeons when things got slow, and things were slow. Evidently, Don Guido would go out and hand out food to the pigeons. This is an Oakes real photo postcard. Oakes was a big photographer and did a lot of work at the Alaska Yukon Exposition in 1909. Intended to be permanent with the Cabrillo Bridge, the domed California State Building, and the low-lying Fine Arts Building. Many of the temporary buildings were retained, though, and used for the 1935 fair. This is how I remember San Diego from my youth, and I don't think it looks a whole lot different today. To the right is the Spreckels organ. To the left is a horticulture building. This is looking east back towards the mountains. Sugar magnate John D. Spreckels owned about half of San Diego. And by 1914, his San Diego Electric Railway Company had run a double track to the exposition. He paid the Austin Organ Company $33,500 for the organ, and construction company $66,500 for construction of the pavilion. It looks exactly like this today. You'll notice on the front of that pavilion, it looks discolored or damp. Well, it was, and we'll go into that in just a bit. And a picture of a crowd. So there was, I don't want to downplay this fair as nobody was there. It was successful and they did have crowds, but it was just nothing like the San Francisco Fair. Teddy Roosevelt said it in closing, one of the closing days, it is so beautiful that I wish to make an earnest plea. I hope that not only will you keep these buildings running for another year, but you will keep these buildings of rare, phenomenal taste and beauty permanently. And that's just about what happened. Elizabeth moved to San Diego along with a lot of the international expositions when the San Francisco Fair closed in December. And this card, although showing the front from San Francisco, is dated San Diego Expo and gives a little bit more information on her. She was born in Budapest, Hungary, talks about her education and that she spoke 6 different languages. They did have displays in their buildings. This is the International Harvester exhibit. Of course, nothing like the scope of the San Francisco Fair. I tried to find information on this card on what was shown, what it was all about. I think just kind of a travelogue of the area by the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. They were definitely on the side of San Diego and San Francisco in hosting the fairs. See graves, firefighting equipment in one of the fair buildings. In May of 1915, a troupe of Spanish musicians and dancers enlivened the plaza and the patios and balconies of the expedition. It's just a super group of, I think about maybe 5 different cards showing the individual dancers and the whole troupe, which this one shows. It's a wonderful card. I understand that the women in the troupe, and it said, from what I read, had a habit of addressing their most ardent love passages as the guitarist played to modest appearing young men in the audience, to the mock consternation of the male guitarists who escorted them. And I can just see that playing out. The very popular Indian exhibit was located where the zoo now exists. 10-acre painted desert built and advertised by the Santa Fe Railroad. Contained buildings resembling architecture of New Mexico and Arizona. Over 300 Indians were, for lack of a better word, imported to live and work in this area. It sometimes did not go well. Teddy Roosevelt greeted many of the Indians at the compound who he knew personally and had special words of praise for Theodore Roosevelt Trujillo, a newly arrived baby the Indians had named after the former president. The original plan was to have 700 to 800 Indians from tribes living alongside the Santa Fe Railway in the Southwest in a great community house. But that just didn't work because the Indians were from so many different places and they couldn't live together. And there was a lot of strife amongst them. I've read some accounts of the problems that they had. Don Guido, again, this is showing one of the few state houses. Again, you'll notice the lack of crowds, and you'll notice Don Guido holding up a lamppost there on the left-hand side. Okay, so we're showing the Prado, the organ pavilion in the background, and you'll notice it's wet. Dangerously low reservoir levels threaten the region's potential to grow, and promoters of the exposition entering its second year worried about the drought's impact on fair attendance. In December of 15, Charles Hatfield, the rainmaker, told the San Diego City Council that he could have the Marina Reservoir overflowing within a year for a fee of $10,000 to be paid only if he succeeded. By the time the rain stopped in San Diego County, nearly 30 inches had fallen in some places, making January 16 the wettest period in the region's recorded history. He went to collect his money and the city threatened him with lawsuits, so he's never paid off. On the way to the Painted Desert, fairgoers passed through the Isthmus, the entertainment center, with exhibits promoting everything from California missions to a Japanese tea pavilion. There was a working model of the Panama Canal that gave visitors an understanding of how the canal worked and even where it was. And the Pala Gem Mine was placed on the grounds. Pala is a community in the far northern part of San Diego. This exhibit showed the mining tourmalines, and visitors would pass through the tunnels like dug by the miners, and they see embedded in the rock crystals. Wet grounds again, showing the Alhambra Cafe. Again, wet, and the Alhambra Cafe was turned into a roller skating rink in 1916. So this exposition was profitable. It didn't reach the big attendance heights compared to the other fairs, but it was low key and it turned a profit, which was gifted to the San Diego museums. First month started pretty slow, but by the summer months, attendance picked up. And then with the new exhibits opening and attendance improving, Thomas Edison and Henry Ford appeared. It picked up steam and promoted the call and agreement to open for a second season. So in its entirety, the fair ran another year through December 31st of 1916. It had turned a profit of $56,000, which is over $1.5 million today. This is an overprinted postcard celebrating Admission Day. Also, Don Guido again, probably on his lunch break. Funding for the 1916 year came from Los Angeles local businesses and proceeds from the 1915 exposition. This is Indian performer Princess Sanita Redfeather. This is interesting. Closing day of the exposition, they listed here as March 31st, 1917. President Gilbert Davidson of the Chamber of Commerce asked the park board for addition 3 months extension into 1917, but supposedly the fair officially ended December 31st. So I don't know who to believe, either this postcard or what I read. Just one of the best cards I have. One of the best things probably to do was eat tamales under the shade of a eucalyptus tree at the 1915 exposition. I love this card because it just shows the personalities of these three ladies that were vendors at the fair. I mean, you can just look at it and tell exactly what their personalities were. Following the conclusion of the exposition, John Earl Fraser wished to have his work cast in bronze. However, when the United States entered into World War I in 1917, bronze became very scarce, and a majority of sculptures that had been exhibited by Expo were deposited into a mud pit in Marina Park. Fraser made several attempts to locate a sculpture in order to obtain a copyright for the image and to cast the work in bronze. His attempts were unsuccessful, and he assumed the piece had been destroyed. But residents of Tulare County, California, rescued and restored it and placed it in Mooney Grove Park in Visalia. This statue now is on display at the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. Fraser is probably also best known for doing the head of the Indian on the buffalo nickel. One of the few sculptures that survived and probably the most famous from the fair. That's my presentation. I've gone on too long. I've drone on. I hope nobody fell asleep. I thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it. I wish I could join you. We'll see you next time. Thank you.